So over to the right of me is where we grow our berries. So we have a mixture of different kinds of berries. We have strawberries, we've got blackberries, and we've also got raspberries. Hi guys, and welcome to We Sow. And in today's episode, I just want to share how we are getting on in spring. So at the moment, as you can see probably behind me, the allotment is pretty much covered over as it's been resting during the winter. But we're just going to give you a bit of a tour. And for the main part, I want to share with you guys also how you guys can grow berries, specifically blackberries and raspberries, and what you need to know for their care. So first bed we have is our garlic bed, and this has been overwintering, and as you can see the plants are coming up quite nicely, because with garlic you have to plant these towards the latter part of the season. So last year around October, November, December, those are the times you would put these in. So what I need to do is I need to keep giving this a good water because the soil is quite dry. And I also want to add some nitrogen to the soil as it will help the plants at this time. If we go over to this side, we will see what we have in the next bed. And in the next bed, this was my brassica bed. And last year we had our kale in here and we had some cabbage. But what we've also decided to do was we grew some broccoli. And so whilst these are kind of at their end now, the broccoli is coming up, and this is what will be ready for harvesting right now. You can see all the little purple broccoli heads which are here, and I'm quite pleased with how these are turning out. You can see with this one especially, this one is nice and big, so we're pretty much in a position to harvest these now that we're in April. Normally it would be March that a lot of these would have been ready, but it was a bit cold, so there's a little delay. But nonetheless, we're happy with how this bed is turning out. The rest of the allotment plot is covered, apart from a few of the beds that have some things that are able to overwinter. And an example just here of something which we do also have open. This bed here, which is a raised one, this has some leeks, and I started these leeks off last year. I started them off in the summer from seed, and I started to grow them in these raised beds, and I grew some in this bed here, and I also grew some in this bed as well. And what I've also done is I've done some companion planting. So inside this bed I've sowed in some carrots, and what will happen is that when the carrots are ready, the carrots will come up and grow alongside these leeks. And then in this bed I've sowed in some beetroot, and the beetroot will grow up amongst the rest of this set of leeks which is also in this bed. So the bed which is to the right of me, this is the experiment of spelt. And for those who saw the episode last year of our summer progress, we saw that I did try spelt, but then I discovered something. They weren't actually flowering at all, so we couldn't really get any grain off of them. So I decided to start again, because I realized after a bit of research that spelt grown in the UK typically is winter sown. So I decided to try a bit of sowing of the spelt in the winter. So what I did was I dug up the bed again. I kept some of the spelt and put it in a container just so that I could see whether that would flower later on. But then I made sure this bed would have my newly sown spelt so that I could see what happens. And the idea with that was that spelt needs a cold snap while the plant is young, and then once it's gone through, then when the season warms up, that's when it will flower and you get grain. Whereas some of the varieties of common wheat, like spring wheat, such as what we had last year, doesn't need that cold snap. But it turns out supposedly that spelt operates in that way. So in this bed, these are the plants that I sowed in. This is just an experiment, just to see what the yields are like. I think that I most likely will just stick with common wheat in the future, because I had to do a lot of sowing in here just to get a very small amount of plants. So I think that the common wheat is much more productive. However, this is just a little fun experiment just to see what can actually happen. Now, to the right of me is where we grew our spinach last year, and you can see that the spinach has overwintered, but we're at a stage where it's not the best quality. So my intention for this round is to dig these up and to sow in some new plants, but leave in some of the younger plants that seem a bit more fresh. And then to the right of this bed, this is where I intend for us to grow our lettuce plants and like the salad type of vegetables. And in here at the moment you can see that we've got some rockets, and it's going to flower. Now my intention is to dig up this bed, so my plan is to possibly just dig up this plant, possibly pot it, just so that I can collect the seeds, so I can clear out the bed, but at the same time still have access to the seeds, because these flowers that are on here, they turn into pods, and then the pods can be collected and the pods can be opened when they are dried, and you will get seeds so that you don't have to keep buying lots and lots of rocket seeds. But we've got a video about that, which you'll probably see a link about, which you can check out for how that all works. So over to the right of me is where we grow our berries. So we have a mixture of different kinds of berries. We have strawberries, we've got blackberries, and we've also got raspberries. And I wanted to just pause on these beds because this is the point in the video where I'd like to share some information about the care of different kinds of berries. Okay, so here what we have are our raspberries. And interestingly enough, we did not buy a single one of these raspberry plants, because anybody who knows anything about raspberries knows that these things spread like crazy. So what happened was that these guys were all over the plot when we first got it. So what I did is I just dug them all up and we planted them inside of this little box here to keep them all contained. So right here what I have is a little bed which has got some raspberries in it. And with raspberries, the care is generally quite simple, but there are just a few things that are really useful to understand about them. So with raspberries, you have two ways of growing them in order to get fruit. So firstly, what happens each year is that you have the main stalk of the bush, which is known as a cane, and these tend to get harder and they tend to become older. And what you can do is cut those down so that they aren't sort of completely pruned back, but just enough so that you still have buds on them. And then these buds that start coming up in the spring, these will produce a nice crop of raspberries throughout the season, right up until October. Whereas the other way of growing them is to actually prune the raspberries back all the way to the ground. And when you do that, instead of getting lots of raspberries throughout the seasons or lots of intermittent raspberries, you tend to just get a massive crop of raspberries from that plant that has been cut right down because it has had to start again, and that tends to come later in the season. So what I've done this time round is I've cut some of them to retain most of the original wood and keep the buds, but then I've also decided to cut some right down to the very bottom so that I can also get those bumper crops which will come up later in the season. And one of the ways that I made the decision on which ones to cut in different ways was that I noticed that some of the plants maybe had died back a bit more and didn't have any good buds, so it made sense to just cut them back to the very ground. And then others were a lot more vigorous and strong, and so those ones remained in the condition that I have them now, and I just simply had to just cut them back a little bit. And in this bed here we have our strawberries, And the strawberries that are growing in here, these are a mixture of different types of strawberries. Some of them are ones which we started off from seed, others are ones which we managed to acquire by transplanting from other parts of the allotment. And the thing to know about strawberries in brief is that they tend to be a bit of an acid loving plant, and I've heard that if you can keep the soil acidic, that's something that they actually like. You can keep the soil acidic, as I mentioned, by adding some amendments that will do the job. So you can add things such as acidifier, like an organic acidifier if you look online. It's the kind of thing that can often be used for things like blueberries, and also can also be used for things such as blue hydrangeas. So that's one way of acidifying the soil. As far as feeding, if you want to add some kind of feed to the strawberries, I've been told that liquid tomato feed is an option that can be used as well. And the thing to be mindful about the strawberries is that they will flower earlier on in the season compared to some of the other berries, and once they begin to set fruit, that's the point where you want to cover them over, because at the beginning you want to make sure that the bees and everything manage to get to the flowers so that they can pollinate them. But once that fruit begins to set, you need to protect it with some covering of some sort so that the birds will not get to them. And also what I tended to enjoy doing with this as a protection was to use sheep's wool pellets, because the sheep's wool pellets will keep the slugs off, because the slugs don't like to crawl on them. Now it doesn't mean that you won't get any slugs, because unfortunately they can crawl on the sides, get onto some of the leaves, but they will be reduced in amount. And one thing as well with the sheep's wool pellets is that the sheep's wool pellets will also add some really useful nutrients to the soil. And over here we have this blackberry bush, which is one bush only, which we grew whereby we caught the roots of a blackberry bush from another allotment plot, and we have been getting a really good crop of blackberries on here every year as a result of us planting this bush. Now the fact that it's spring means that the important work that needs to be done on this to get a good yield of fruit is the pruning. And this is because blackberries, they only fruit on 1-year-old wood. And so what that means is that the more you allow the bush to grow and have lots and lots of really old branches that are more than a year old, it means that you start to get less and less fruit. So what I'm doing with this year, as I always do, is to cut back all of these branches or these canes that had fruited before. And the reason why is because the fact that there was fruit on them last year means that they were a year old. So if I cut them back, instead what I'll be left with is a set of canes that are young, that are not 2 years old, and which will produce fruit. And it also ensures that I keep my blackberry bush nice and small. So pruning back thoroughly, taking back what grew fruit last year, is the trick to ensuring that we have some canes which are only about a year old and which will produce more flowers, and as a result will produce more fruit. And the important thing with these is just to make sure that they're watered well throughout the season. They then generally don't need a large amount of care because they are quite wild normally. They often tend to spread easily, so they do a good job of nourishing themselves. But the most important thing is just to make sure that you keep on the pruning. And as far as the fruit is concerned as well, when you are picking blackberries, when the season comes, the blackberries that you want to pick are the ones that are nice and firm, which haven't gotten too soft, because usually if they've got a little bit too soft, then they're starting to turn, and that's when they're more likely to have creatures like, you know, little beetles laying things in them. So you want to make sure that they're firm and that they are nice and dark in color. And with the blackberries, typically the point in the season, should I say, where they are ready for harvest is usually towards the mid to late summer. So usually by the time we're around July, August time, that's when you will see that the blackberries are ready. So if you guys are interested in growing some blackberries, feel free to check out your local garden store, or if you know anybody who has a plant that they're looking to get rid of, it's definitely worth doing. And if you just keep on top of the pruning as I've described, you should be in good stead to have a great harvest of your own blackberries. Thanks for watching today's episode. Do remember to like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this video to as many people as you can. Thanks again, take care, bye.